The beginning of the program sets a bunch of variables. So the first one is the character's position on the Y position of the screen. As you should know, 0 is at the top and 400 is at, or 600 actually is at the bottom. This is the health variable. The player starts out with 3 health, but you can make this anything you want. This is a score. These two I will come back to later. These are the two arrays that the enemies and the projectiles are stored in. And then this is the beginning speed of the enemies as the game starts. First, we have then for the actual program, we have the draw function, which calls every single frame, so it updates constantly. We have the background declaration, so that a black background will show for each frame. We have no stroke, so this just makes it so that there's no line around each of the shapes. It makes it a little more clean and easy to see. This first line of code just sets the character's position equal to the mouse Y. So if we move the mouse up and down, the character should also move up and down, as you can see. Next, we have if health is greater than 0. So this is just checking if the game is still going. If this is true, then we fill with this color, which is a blue. We set the rect mode equal to center, so that means the rectangle is drawn at the specific position. This specific position is the center of the square instead of the top left that it normally is. So then we draw the character, and as you can see, it's at 50 on the X value and character position char pause on the Y value, which is equal to the mouse value as we set up here, the mouse Y. And the size is 50 pixels by 50 pixels, so it is a square. Next, we have the B timer variable. So the B timer variable basically makes it so that there is a little bit of a delay between each of the projectiles you can shoot. So if the mouse is pressed and the B timer is equal to 0, at the beginning we set B timer equal to 0. So if you're clicking the mouse and B timer is equal to 0, we set B timer equal to 50. So this is the number of frames before you can shoot another projectile. And then also we add a new bullet to this array. So what this really is the position of the bullet. So it starts off at 75 on the X value and char pause on the Y value. So that means it comes out straight out of the character's position since the Y value is equal. Next, we iterate through the projectiles in the array. So this is a for loop that loops through all of the projectiles, and we use I as the variable or the index. First, we fill it with this white color. Next, we draw the actual projectile or the bullet. And since rect mode is still equal to center, this draws at the exact position. This position will be in the center of the rectangle and is 15 pixels wide and 10 pixels wide, or 10 pixels long. And then we increment the X position. So this represents the X position of the bullet, this array, and in this array, and then this is the Y position of the bullet. So as you can see, we never actually change the Y position, so it goes straight across the screen. But we do change the X position by 5 every frame. So that is the speed of the bullet. You can also change this if you want to make this faster or slower, or even go backwards, but that's not really helpful. Next, we iterate through the enemies. So these are the red things that come from the right of the screen that you can shoot. Oh, and as you can see, if you press it, it takes a little bit of time before you can shoot another one, and they all move across the screen. Anyways, if we iterate through the enemies, first we fill it with a red color, then we draw the actual rectangle, which represents the sprite of the enemy, and rect mode is still equal to center, so that this position is at the center of the rectangle that is drawn in. Next, we decrease the X position. Well, actually, as we start, we'll get to that later. But for every enemy, we decrease the X position by the speed. So decreasing means it goes to the left. So that makes sense. Also, if it is less than -50, so if the X position goes past the screen by a bit, then we decrease the health by 1 and we remove this enemy. Next, if the distance between the player, which is this right here, and the actual enemies is less than 60, and this value is just like the radius between the center and the center, so that we can check if they're colliding. If this distance is less than 60, then we set the health equal to 0. Basically, it means that the player automatically dies, and we get rid of this specific enemy. Also, inside this enemy loop, we loop through the projectiles, and if this just checks if a projectile and an enemy is colliding. So if the position of this projectile and the enemy is less than this number, 30, and that just basically checks if they're colliding, we add 1 to the score. This 2 right here, this is the health of the enemy. So for each enemy, we'll get to this later, but the first value in its array is corresponding to the X position. The next one corresponds to the Y position, and the next one corresponds to its health. So if it gets hit, then we set the health equal to 0, and we get rid of the bullet. Then afterwards, after we finish looping through the bullets, we check if this specific enemy's health is 0, and if it is, we get rid of it because it has died by 1. Since if it is greater than 0, that represents the amount of frames before the player can shoot another bullet. So if it is above 0, then we decrease it by 1. And if it's equal to 0, then we don't decrease it at all because that's not what's in the if statement. The E timer we'll get to later. At first, E timer is set to 0, and when it's equal to 0 or it's less than 0, then we create a new enemy which is past the end of the screen, so you don't see it at first, and we set the Y position equal to a random value from about here to here, so it doesn't go off the screen. And also, as we said before, we set the third value in this enemy array equal to 1, which represents its health. And then after we add this new enemy, we set the E timer equal to this. So this basically just counts the amount of frames before a new enemy can spawn. And at first it is, since speed is 2, at first it is 120, so that's 2 seconds. But as speed increases, we want the game to get harder, so this goes down. So when speed is 3, say, this would be 80 frames, which is like just over a second. So we want this to keep getting faster and faster so the enemies come faster and faster and the game gets harder. Also, each frame, we increase the speed, again, so the game gets harder. And then we draw the text right here on the top left, which represents your score and your health. And you should already know this. You should already know how to string concatenate and add this text value. Then also at the end of this if health is greater than 0 loop, since we have gone through all of this code, this covers when health is equal to 0. So when that happens, we fill it, we create the color red for this text, we make it so it's aligned in the very center of the screen, we make it large, and then we say that the user's game over. So it says game over, this is a new line, string concatenating again, we get score, and so this displays the score of the player, and then width over 2 and height over 2 is just the center of the screen. And yeah, that should be it for this game. And here's some gameplay. So yep, that's it. Thank you for watching.